Do you want to download your own free Festive Fox PDF pattern? Would you like to see how I turn these fabric scraps into this cute fox applique? Or even into this Christmas card?
Hi, I'm Linda from Sewing Bee Fabrics. I want to show you how I made this Festive Fox. It's sewn by sewing machine with a free motion foot. If that's a foot you're not familiar with, I've put some links in the description. You can find out more and find out how to find one that fits your machine. I've made you a PDF pattern that you can download if you'd like to have a go at making one yourself. Head to the link in the description and you can just download it there. There's no need to sign up for anything or subscribe or anything like that. It's just my Christmas gift to you. So if you'd like to sew along with me, then I'd love that.
To make this, I used threads in various colours, fabric scraps, a fusible webbing, I used Heat and Bond Ultra Hold, an erasable fabric pen, a free motion sewing machine foot, and some stabiliser. I have my template printed out and I have some Heat and Bond Ultra Hold. You could use a double-sided fusible webbing, but the good thing about this is it has one side that you can iron down and then a papery backing, so you can peel that off afterwards and then fix that down later. I've drawn the template pieces back to front because if you're using Heat and Bond, you're going to be sticking that to the back of the fabric. So if you're doing it without Heat and Bond, just draw them on the back of the fabric. The easiest way to use this template is just to put your Heat and Bond over the top of your template, either on a window or on a table with glass, and pop a light underneath. And then that way you can see your pattern pieces to be able to easily trace straight over the top without having to cut anything out. I roughly cut out the Heat and Bond pieces and matched them up to my fabric scraps, then used the iron to press them in place and bond the adhesive. I find it's best to press down still rather than move the iron, otherwise you can accidentally move your pieces. I also used a scrap of PUL fabric as well, but to make sure that the waterproof layer didn't stick to the iron, I used a scrap of cotton in between. I cut all my pieces out and then I carefully peeled off the papery backing from the back of all the Heat and Bond pieces. Once they were all done, I grabbed a background piece of fabric and started arranging all of those pieces like a cute little jigsaw. I found it easier to arrange from the head downwards rather than arranging by colour, so I did the face first, the body, and then ended up with a cute little nose. With a cotton scrap in between, I used the iron to bond all the pieces together. I used a water-soluble fabric marker to mark where I wanted to do the extra details, like the eyes and the mouth and the twigs for the branch. I drew them on freehand, but of course if you'd prefer, you have the picture in the download so you can trace them on if you want to. I've also added some berries and some details in the snow and a bush in the background just to make the scene a little more interesting. I used a free motion embroidery foot, which is also sometimes called a darning foot. To use it, simply unscrew the foot that you normally have on and screw this one on in its place. Then depending on your machine, you'll either need to cover or lower your feed dogs, which is the part underneath the foot that helps to pull the fabric through, because we don't want the machine pulling it through for us. I'm using a layer of stabiliser underneath my fabric. This gives it a bit of extra stability. I like to always start off by making sure I've got the bobbin thread out of the way. So to do that, I manually pass the needle down and back up once, and then you can use that thread to hook the bobbin thread right up through the fabric to be able to hold out of the way. I started off outlining the face with the white thread, and I always just stitch on the spot a couple of times first before moving off to anchor that in. If you find your bobbin thread's going to get in your way, just stop for a moment and then you can trim it once you're away from it. Don't forget, when you need to go around corners with this foot, you don't need to stop and swivel your fabric. You can just go backwards. If, like me, you're planning on turning this into a Christmas card, you don't need to sew down the edges, because the Heat and Bond is strong enough to hold it for that purpose. But I think it adds a really nice touch. I outlined around both the white patches on the inner ears, then moved down to the main body. I always find it helpful to look ahead at where I'm stitching next rather than trying to concentrate on exactly where the needle is right now. So that way you get better at guiding the fabric where it needs to go rather than having to suddenly stop and change direction. The zigzag line where the white and the orange meets each other can be a little bit tricky if you're new to free motion sewing, so just take your time as you go around those sharp corners. As well as outlining the tail, I decided to add in some zigzag lines so it would give a bit of an illusion of fur. If you haven't used a free motion foot before, then I would definitely recommend trying it out on a piece of scrap fabric first. That way you can test out your stitches and give yourself a chance to play with your thread tension as well and see what works best on your own sewing machine. When I'm ready to change thread colours, what I like to do is to trim away all of the little loose threads, and then this way there's less threads that can get caught up and cause us problems as we carry on sewing. I've got orange thread up next, but don't forget there's nothing stopping you from coming up with a completely different colour scheme for your fox. But feel free to get creative and add your own touch. Maybe add a hat to the fox, or even give it a little friend, or add something else going on in the background. I'd love to see what you guys come up with. I cut the orange part of the body as two separate pieces so that I could get the directionality of the fabric to make it look like there was a difference in movement of fur. But that doesn't mean I have to sew them separately, so I'm just going to sew them together, making sure these edges are tacked down in the middle as well. So I'm just using some medium weight tearaway stabiliser that I happen to have lying around. If you wanted to give yourself even more stability, you could always use an iron-on stabiliser instead. And again, just stitching the other side of the body down around the outside too. If for whatever reason you don't want to use stabiliser underneath, you can always hoop your fabric instead to give you more stability. He wouldn't be a festive fox without a scarf now, would he? So I'm stitching the scarf on next. Once I outline these sections here, I thought it would be a cute little detail to add in some little tassels at the end of the scarf like this. So you can see I'm just doing small stitches up and down, going over the same spot a couple of times just to make those little bits a little bit more defined. And just sectioning out those two sides of the scarf that hangs down before finishing off the rest of the scarf. Just because I've used threads that match my fabric colours doesn't mean that you have to. You might find that you get a much more fun look for a funky pattern that you're using if you use something that was contrasting, or maybe you wanted to use an invisible thread and not have to worry about thread changes at all. With a dark brown thread, I'm just outlining the ears of the fox here. Keep in mind, to make this video more interesting for you, I've sped up my sewing. But in real life, go slowly, build up gradually, and then that way you're less likely to have a problem with thread breakages. Don't forget as well that the speed you're moving the machine will impact the size of the stitches that you're creating. So have a play around with those settings to make sure that you're getting the look you want. The brown thread's out next to sew around the edge of the nose. And don't forget, when you're moving position, you don't need to stop and start with your thread each time. Simply lift the presser foot when your needle's up, move your fabric, lower it back down, do a couple of stitches and you're good to go. By making the legs dark brown, it makes it more clear that the fox is sat there looking prettily by adding that contrast rather than leaving it as orange or white. If you're going to use your applique on something that's going to get washed, so like a cushion or some clothing, you might want to pre-wash your fabrics first. Now this is the part where we're going to start using the free motion foot to do a little bit of drawing as well as just outlining pieces. So here we're moving down onto our branch. To create a more branch-like effect, what I like to do is to go up and down over the same area a couple of times, and then this creates a slightly more uneven thickness, rather than, for example, just using a zigzag stitch. I've stitched up into the leaves a little bit as well, and that gives a slightly more veined appearance to the leaves without having to sew the actual veins in place. And I've also stitched out some little branches that then our berries can sit onto. For our little foxy's face, I've used a black thread to make it really stand out from the white. This is probably the most important part that we're sewing to get the look that we want with our little fox. So if you're not feeling as confident, then I would have a go on a piece of scrap fabric a couple of times first, or maybe leave it till the end, when by then you're feeling even more confident with how you're using your free motion foot. To make the cute sleepy effect with the eye, what I've done is a slightly curved line with about 3 little eyelashes coming diagonally away. Then our mouth is just a straight line down that splits outwards and curves upwards into a smile each side. And don't forget to have fun as well. The more relaxed you're feeling, the more relaxed your hands and your shoulders will be. And that'll change how you're moving your arms, because if they're more relaxed, your movement will become more smooth. That face just really sets the mood for the picture, doesn't it? I've used a green thread here just to sew down the edges of these leaves. If you wanted to add in some extra detail, you could always get a different colour green thread and just add in some extra little veins. By layering the green of the leaves on top of the fabric for our fox, it adds that extra feeling of depth and texture. I've used a red thread to add some berries. To make them, all I've done is just quickly circled around and around a couple of times on the spot to make a nice round shape. But if you wanted your berries to have more of a 3D effect, what you could do is use some embroidery floss to do a French knot, and that way it would stand out and make it look more fun. I'm using a light green thread to make a bush effect in the background. To do that, I'm going to follow this central line up, just coming out diagonally and back to make a feathery leaf effect. If you've got a fancy sewing machine and you want to change it up a little, you could always see if you've got a feather stitch or something similar to that, and you can use that to create a similar effect. If for whatever reason you're struggling with your stitching, don't be too quick to blame yourself. Because of the way that the free motion stitches work with the extra variation, this is where maintenance of the sewing machine can be even more important. Because some badly placed lint or fluff or a part that needs oiling can make a difference to how smoothly you're able to operate your machine. So I would recommend always giving your sewing machine a good clean before using it for a project like this. I used a light blue thread to draw swirls in the snow, just to add a little bit of extra movement and feeling of texture in there. But if you wanted, you could always add some extra snowflakes and other decorative features, or maybe even some little footprints. If you wanted to make the snow look even more magical, you could maybe pick a thread that's got a shimmery, glittery or metallic effect. Now I'm happy with that, so I'm going to finish my sewing now. This next part always feels like magic. I've dipped a cloth into water and then I'm just dabbing it onto the areas where I've used that water-soluble marker. And you can see within a few seconds the markings have completely disappeared. So I would always make sure to remove all the marks before you iron your work flat, because otherwise some markers will set with the heat and become a lot more difficult to remove after. To make a border for the card and to be able to glue it in neatly afterwards, I marked at 1.5 centimetre intervals around the card, which is around ½ inch. I cut the middle piece of cardboard out then. I spread glue around all of the borders, and I like to use PVA wood glue because I find it strong enough to get a really good bond. I fixed my stabiliser to my fabric, then laid it face down inside the card so it's ready to face out. Then I just popped it under a pile of books for the afternoon to make sure that it dried flat. See, doesn't that look cute now?
And it's done. I hope you found this video helpful, and if you enjoyed it or you picked up some useful hints or tips, then I hope you'll press like. If you'd like to sew with me again, then don't forget to press subscribe. You can also head over to our website and subscribe to our newsletter, and we'll email you when we have a new tutorial out. I hope you all have a wonderful Christmas, and we'll be bringing you more tutorials in the new year. Bye now.